was me. What did you think was going on in there? How do you succeed the best-selling SUV in Europe? Well, that's the problem Dacia's had to consider with its all-new Duster. But it also has an added issue because 70% of Dacia buyers have already owned one before, and you won't need me to tell you that people who own Dusters love them very much. So when it comes to this new one, well, the brand has had to make a car that is a lot better and much improved, but for not a lot more money. Now, we know a good deal when we see one because that's what we're all about, and so is Dacia, which is why they're offering this new Duster from under £19,000. Although, you know, you can find one for just over £10,000 if you download the Cinch app or visit our website. And of course, that outgoing model is one of the cheapest cars to run on British roads. But if you're like most British buyers and you want the latest car and in the highest spec, well, even going for a top grade journey like this one here will still only cost you about £26,000.
And for context, that's only 1,500 quid more than the MG ZS Hybrid in trophy form, and it's 17 grand less than the Discovery Sport.
Okay, yes, I know this Dacia is not made from the same stuff as a Land Rover Discovery Sport, but I mean, it looks really good, doesn't it? Check out this front grille. It's very Jeep-like in its design, and it leads into these new high-tech, quite sleek headlights, which sit under this horizontal bonnet, which is very muscular, like a proper SUV. But of course, this nice, snazzy front end is of course matched by some very Dacia wheels. We've got 18-inch alloys, but they've got really chunky tyres on them, which should make them both curb-proof and pretty good at soaking up the rubbish we have on British roads. But of course, Dacia has also kept a lot of plastic around the exterior, although this time, 20% of this stuff is recycled, so it's good for the environment. And you can tell that Dacia wants you to know this, of course, because if you look, you can see its starkle design in there. It's sort of, the plastic fleck is visible inside because it's all compressed together. And also, they've slapped a big recycle badge on there as well. And there's an added bonus to this plastic too, because it's black all the way through, not just on the outside. So if you scuff it or get it scratched, well, it won't show up too much because the lower layers are black as well. So you have to look pretty closely to see when you've had those mishaps. Of course, being a Dacia as well, you've got a roof rack up here, and this is a modular roof rack, so you can take it off and replace it, for example, with a tent, if you like sleeping on top of your Dacia. But my favourite bit of the new Dacia Duster is actually at the back, because I think these tail lights with their Y-shaped design look really cool. And yes, I know this black bar in the middle kind of gives the car a monobrow or a moustache on its rear, but overall, I think this is a good mix of sporty and functional. And yes, just like a Porsche 911 GT3, Dacia has saved weight by putting a sticker on here with the hybrid badge instead of plastic badges. That's smart, it makes it faster. And of course, you've got more plastic down here, but it's very functional because this protruding part of the bumper means if you do happen to have a bit of a parking mishap, well, you're only hitting the cheaper and slightly easier to hide stuff. Although, of course, this being a Dacia, it still does come with quite a lot of tech, so you've still got a reversing camera, which means I think we should jump inside and see what the big upgrades in there are like. Now, earlier I said you could get a Dacia Duster for under £19,000, but I would recommend that you go for one of the higher models like an Expression or one of the top grade cars, because that means instead of a phone holder, you get an actual infotainment screen, and you also get a digital instrument cluster. But before I tell you about those and whether they're any good, let's talk about the general fit and finish of this cabin because, well, let's be frank, it is full of hard touch plastics, like absolutely everywhere. Here and down here, they're everywhere. But because this is a cheap car and because this is a Dacia Duster, it's easier to think them as tough and hard wearing than cheap. And let's be frank, it still looks quite nice in here, and the design all goes with that chunky modular exterior. And things you touch, well, steering wheel included, are actually okay. You've got a leather, or more likely pleather, wrapped steering wheel over here with buttons in the places you want them to be. And that's also true elsewhere in the cabin. Dacia hasn't followed the likes of Volkswagen, for example, with just having 2 window switches down there. You've got 4, so if I want to lower the back ones, I don't have to press rear and then lower them. It's just a quick press of a button. And even the climate control switches remain on the dash. They're easy to use and they're so conveniently placed. But if you do want to dive into the infotainment system, well, I'm going to be honest, it's okay, but it's not the best system out there. Of course, this is a budget car, and so the infotainment system is simple, but that makes it easy to use. And I quite like the graphics and the colours Dacia's chosen. Plus, you do get, as standard in this model, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. So for most of us, you're going to put your phone on the wireless charging mat down there and just have it emulated on the screen. And this instrument cluster, again, is very simple. It looks a little bit like a retro game, but it actually means it's clear and easy to use, and there isn't much customization, so you don't have to fuss and fumble with it. You just get on and use it as is designed. As for elsewhere in the car, well, if you're thinking about storage space, it's not going to have as much room as some of the electric cars out there. But for petrol cars and hybrid cars, well, this is good. You've got your space for your phone down there. You've got a couple of USB-C ports to go with your 12 volt. There's a random shelf up here. It's not got a rubber mat, so your phone might fly out if you're going over lumps and bumps at speed. But you've also got space for other small things, whether it's, I don't know, your car key in there, and you've got cup holders. In fact, I can show you the space you've got with my bottle. That goes in no problems, but the armrest does sort of block this one, so that's for your smaller cans, I guess. And if you want to put your bottle in the door, there's a space down there as well. Plus, well, that's quite deep, that, isn't it? Yeah, pretty good. The seats as well. Now, if you have seen our Renault 5 review, you might be familiar with this denim-like material up here, but it isn't denim, it's actually recycled material, so it helps to keep the production CO2 low, and also I think the finish is quite nice. And these seats as well, a really big surprise when I jumped in was how much adjustment there is in them. They're not electric, you have to manually do it, but you can go either really low or really high, and there's so much headroom available. People of all shapes and sizes are going to get comfortable in this car. You can also pull the steering wheel, raise it, etc. Dacia hasn't left you short on the comfort in that regard.
But it doesn't matter what setting you have the seats in, because the visibility around the Duster is really good. There are chunky door mirrors and you can see out of the rear window well enough. Plus, Dacia's squeezed a bit of extra glass in front of the C-pillars to widen your view. Although really, most people are going to use the reversing camera, which provides a wide angle, but is quite old school in its resolution.
Now, before we jump into the back seats, we've just noticed something very interesting and something very Dacia, which is this bit of guttering down here. Now, it seems to me like it basically pushes water down and away from your feet, so it doesn't get curled under the car's door and into your toes as you step out. So it's a pretty nifty feature, and I don't know if it's featured on Dacias before. If you've had a Duster and you've seen that, let us know in the comments below, but for people like me, that's really cool. Now, getting into the back of the Duster is quite an easy affair. Firstly, because this roofline is actually quite squared off, and secondly, because you've got a nifty hidden away door handle, which helps to keep the design cool, but actually is quite nice to use as well. And when you get in, well, there is a lot of space. I mean, the knee room is really good, and I'm really surprised by the amount of foot room as well. I can get my entire feet under the chair ahead of me here. Plus, I'm not short at all on headroom. So if you are adults in the back, if you're customers of a rural taxi, because I think these are quite popular with taxi drivers, or even if you are the teenagers in the back of the family car, I think you're going to be very comfortable even on longer drives. And if you're really, really small, well, you'll be held safely in place by the ISOFIX bar, which is very easily reached just via a few pockets down there. You don't, of course, get a few creature comforts. For example, there's no armrest here to fold out, no ski hatch, no way of resting your arm there, no cup holders either. But, I mean, there are additional things that are arguably a little bit more important in 2024, including a couple of USB-C ports down there, and you've got this adapter piece here, which is called a YouClip, not to be confused with UKIP. And that is where you can add accessories which Dacia will sell you. So you could mount, for example, your phone or your iPad or, I don't know, some other stuff as well to keep the kids happy or the customers happy in the back. And because this is a Dacia, yes, you've got more of these recycled materials, and you've even got rubber mats. So if you've got muddy feet like I have, it's not a problem really. Now, this being a Dacia, you do, of course, have a manual tailgate, but when you open it, you will reveal a pretty large boot. In fact, the boot, along with that rear legroom, is one of the biggest gains for this new Duster. And we reckon if you have yourself the biggest carry-on bag you can take onto an aeroplane, so the biggest cabin bag, stacked upright like this, you can get 4 of these across the back, which is really going to be a big tick for cab drivers, especially those who do the airport run. But if you prefer to have your car with the bags over there and you want to expose the underfloor storage, well, you're going to notice how much more room you can get, because this boot floor can drop down quite a bit, or you can leave these bits in place, they actually come out entirely, and hide away valuable objects. But if you're like a lot of Dacia owners who have dogs, like Rocky here, well, you're going to want to probably leave the floor in this position because it's flat, so it's much easier and much less intimidating for him to jump in and be happy in the boot. Good dog.
Of course, if you don't have a furry friend in the boot, you can leave the parcel shelf in place and use the extra storage compartments it has for added convenience. If you need more, you can fold down the rear seats in a 60/40 configuration quite easily.
Now, handily for us, the Dacia Duster we're driving on the road today is the most sensible version you can buy, because this is an expression trim, so it's in the middle of the range, but it's powered just by the front wheels and it uses a hybrid setup. And well, as we know with Dacias, fuel economy is very important, and now you can't get a diesel model, so those who really like to hypermile their Dusters might have been left a little bit wanting. But thankfully this hybrid model really does fill the gap, because well, it gets 55 miles per gallon combined, which is not far off what you'd achieve in a diesel. And that's despite the fact that this car, even with its latest bodywork, is still pretty blunt shaped when it pushes through the air. And because this is a standard hybrid, meaning you don't have to plug it in, it means as a driver you don't really have to drive in any particular way to achieve that very impressive economy figure. And of course, this engine and this hybrid setup is exactly the same as the one you get in the Renault Clio, which I really rate. And actually, if you want to see why I love that car for much more than just that powertrain, well, click the link on the screen now. And actually, the hybrid setup also benefits you in other ways. And well, the first way is when you're cruising around at low speed. You'll notice that the car feels especially smooth and especially quiet. It's a really refined powertrain, and that's partly because the engine itself isn't doing that much work. A lot of the power, a lot of the weight is being pulled by the electric stuff. And even when you're maneuvering at super low speed, sometimes the engine is completely off.
And this really adds to the quality feel of the Dacia's mechanical setup, because it means there's no perceivable fumbling of automatic gears and no need for start-stop tech to annoy you in traffic.
The other bonus of that hybrid setup is the fact that because you've got electric oomph to really get the car going before the petrol engine picks up, this Duster feels quite nippy, and that was true in the Jogger, but because the Jogger's bigger, it was a bit muted. In this slightly lighter Duster, if I put my foot down, don't get me wrong, this isn't rapid, but it picks up to speed very easily. If you're accelerating off of a slip road onto a motorway, you're going to be fine, you're not going to have any issues. So this is a usable powertrain as well as being very eco-friendly.
I must admit, the hybrid engine's inherent quietness does mean wind noise over the car's chunky door mirrors is more noticeable, but for a family car of this price, the Duster's not short on refinement at all. Of course, you could trade some of that and go for the more rugged manual 4x4 Duster, but what's the point of that? Well, have a watch of this.
Now, the beauty of the 4x4 version of the Dacia Duster is that it's just as simple to use as the road car, because, well, instead of having to worry about lots of different settings, you just have one simple dial down by your left leg, and it means you can click through a few modes. You've got modes for sand and snow, or you've also got your automatic and eco modes, of course, for the road. But the one we're using today in this quarry is the proper off-road mode, and that basically ensures that both the front and rear axles are called into play all the time, although the car does juggle the torque a bit, so it's not always 50-50. But effectively, the car does all the hard work for you, and you just have to make sure you don't drive into the lake of the quarry. So even in this extreme setting where we have quite a lot of water to get through, well, this Duster is absolutely terrific. I know that's always been the case. The last one basically shared much of what this car has, and actually the driveline is basically the same, but now we've got more electronic tech to play with, so it means I've got better visibility around the car, and also the traction control system is just more effective. So I, even if I'm a numpty, can do awesome things like this, drive through water. So if you live in a flooded area, for example, you are not going to have any issues in a Duster. And then of course, with the car having such a direct steering and really light steering too, and even this manual gearbox being so easy to use, plus, as I'm using now, this car has a fantastic turning circle. Really? Is there anything this car can't do? All right, well, let's be honest, the Dacia Duster's not going to break a Nürburgring lap time anytime soon, but when it comes to stuff like this, like camping and driving up rocks and things, or okay, even just going on the school run, the new Dacia Duster is absolutely brilliant. It's exceptional value for money. Although the class is pretty crowded these days, so if you still need a bit more inspiration, we have actually compiled some of the best SUVs you can buy right now into this video over here. But before you go watching that, where are the marshmallows?